Okay, so we need to decarbonise our electricity supply and electrify everything. How are we going to do this? Now, it's important not to underestimate what a big job this is going to be. Now, in 1990, 87% of the world's energy came from fossil fuels. Now, in 2021, after 30 years of wind farms and nuclear and solar power plants and so on, that's gone from 87% to 83%. A pathetic 4% drop. So all that effort over 30 years, we've dropped it by 4%. But in the next less than 30 years, we've got to drop it to close to zero. So we've got to do drastically more than we've been able to do in the past. So roughly 20 times more carbon-free electricity than in the last 30 years. And it's worse than that because the world's population is growing and poor countries are becoming richer, which is a good thing. We want to supply electricity to people who are currently choking as they burn wood in their huts or whatever it might be. And we want to allow them to have a richer lifestyle like we in the developed world enjoy. So all of which means that we're going to have to be way more effective than we've been in the past. We're going to have to put a lot of renewable energy in. We also need to start now. We've said we've got to achieve this in 30 years, but really we've got to achieve a lot of it pretty quickly. But also, a lot of the things we build now are going to have long lifespans. If we build a coal-fired power plant now, it might still be producing CO2 in 2040 or 2050. Cars in Australia typically last about 20 years, so any petrol-burning car you buy now or giant SUV is still going to be producing CO2 in 20, 30 years' time. Likewise, gas heaters and water tanks last 10 to 20 years. So if we keep building things for a few more years, it's already locking in carbon dioxide emissions for 10, 20, 30 years. So what are we going to need to make this possible? I mean, number one, we're going to need technologies that are cheap, because we're going to have to build an awful lot of them. If you're just going to build one environmentally friendly power station or one environmentally friendly car or something like that, then maybe it doesn't matter. You can spend a bit over the odds, but we are going to have to produce literally hundreds of thousands to millions of renewable power plants in the next 20 or 30 years, and you're not going to be able to build that many power plants unless they are cheap. It's also got to be technologies that are technically mature. Take nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion may well be a fantastic power, but we have not yet demonstrated commercially available break-even point, and we won't for probably 10 or 20 years. And then we've got to figure out how to mass produce them and produce huge numbers of them, work out what minerals we need, the whole infrastructure. There's no way that's going to be ready in time. We really want things that already exist. It should already be technically demonstrated. There should already be lots of them around the world, because then we know what it takes to build these things and we can just ramp it up rather than having to develop new technology as well. And they've got to be technologies that can be massively scaled up quickly. Not all technologies are like this. Bear in mind it took us over 100 years to build our current energy infrastructure. We almost don't notice it, but there are power plants around the world, transmission lines, gas pipes, heaters, petrol stations. There's a huge infrastructure worth trillions of dollars that's been built up over 100 years. And we're going to have to replace that in maybe 20 or 30 years. So it's a massive job. Now, if I was giving this video 10 or 15 years ago, we wouldn't have known how to do this. But I think we do. Most people who work in the field think we know how to do this. The technologies are there to decarbonise, that meet all these requirements. Now the consensus is it's going to be primarily solar photovoltaic, solar cells, and wind power. We're then going to need what's called firming, because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, and that will be probably a combination of batteries and pumped hydro storage. And we'll need some transmission to take the power from areas where the sun is shining to those where it's not. There will also be some demand management. There might be some big, particularly power guzzling users that can get turned down briefly in moments when there's a shortage. It's overbuilding. We may need to build too many wind turbines or solar powers so that even on the cloudy, low wind days we can generate enough power. And maybe nuclear, but probably not in Australia. We'll talk about that a bit later. The basic trouble with nuclear is that at the moment it's very expensive. It may be that small modular reactors can bring the price down, but no one's actually demonstrated them. It's not a mature technology. So maybe in 10 years' time they've got some demonstration plants, then maybe 10 years after that you can start mass producing these things, but it's not going to happen fast enough. And there are other techniques which are currently cheaper and more mature, which we can do right now. In Australia right now, the right-wing parties are pushing nuclear, but it is not a proven technology. It won't be happening for 20 years, so most people think this is basically do nothing for 20 years policy rather than actual nuclear. Nuclear may be very important in 2040 or 2050, but it's not going to be ready fast enough, is the consensus.